I woke up on the floor of the storage room at 2:43 a.m. And for a moment, I couldn't remember why I was there. The floor was cold. My back ached from the weird angle I'd somehow curled into between the water heater and a stack of Megan's seasonal throw pillows. The last thing I remembered was wiping down the kitchen counter after the party. A soft buzz in my head from the wine, her laughter in the background, my hands moving on autopilot. Then the edges of everything got blurry, and I guess I'd come in here for, I don't know, maybe to find a spare blanket? Maybe to get a minute alone? I never meant to fall asleep. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. Everything had that strange, too quiet quality. The hallway lights were off, the apartment dim except for a pale glow leaking under the door from the living room. My throat was dry, and my brain felt stuffed with cotton. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't strong, but it was there. Something sharp and cool, not familiar. Not Megan's scent. She wore soft, citrusy perfumes, things with amber or vanilla or lavender. This was more aggressive, expensive. It hit the back of my throat like a cough drop someone had lit on fire. I didn't own cologne like that, and unless Megan had taken up wearing men's fragrances, someone else had been here. I stood slowly, the blood rushing to my head. My foot hit something on the floor, a shopping bag. Inside, a receipt. The kind that Uber sends when you don't print it, just forward it to your email. The timestamp said 2:31 a.m. Drop-off location. Our address. Pickup. Somewhere downtown. 2 wine glasses sat in the sink. One had lipstick on the rim. Not Megan's usual shade. This was a dark plum color. I froze. Footsteps. Light, deliberate. Then the sound of the front door closing with exaggerated quietness. I peeked through the hallway toward the living room and saw her. Megan. She walked in barefoot, heels dangling from one hand, coat buttoned all the way up to her neck even though it was still unseasonably warm outside. She didn't look drunk. More like rattled, controlled. She didn't call out to me, didn't check the bedroom, just moved through the apartment with the grace of someone who'd practiced the routine. She pulled out her phone immediately and sat at the kitchen counter. I stood in the hallway, still hidden in the dark, watching her back. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't speak. Instead, she pressed her earbuds in and hit play on a series of voice messages. I couldn't hear the words, just the faint, tinny sound of someone else's voice. Male. Her face didn't move. She just sat there, breathing quietly, her brows pulled tight. And when it ended, she just stood up, poured herself a glass of water, and walked to the bedroom. She never once looked in my direction. I didn't confront her. I waited a few minutes and walked out, pretending I'd just gotten up to use the bathroom. She was already under the covers, her back to me, breathing deep and steady like she was asleep. The next morning, I made the coffee. I stood by the window longer than usual, staring at nothing, letting the steam rise up and disappear like smoke signals no one was going to answer. Megan came in wearing one of my old t-shirts, hair up in a messy knot. She kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. I could still smell the cologne on her coat, which she'd draped over the chair. "Last night was nuts," she said, yawning. "I'm still buzzing from everything." I nodded. "You got home late." "Yeah. Corporate thing went long," she said quickly, like she'd been waiting for the question. "Everyone wanted to grab drinks after. Celebration, you know. I told you they might keep us out. You were probably passed out before I even left the bar." "Maybe," I said. "Found a receipt in the storage room. Ride home at 2:31 a.m. She paused at the sink. "Just a second. Just enough." "Oh," she said casually, rinsing out a mug. "That must have been Kristen. She ordered the car for me. I think she emailed it to my phone by mistake. You know how bad she is with tech." "And the other wine glass?" I asked. She looked up, blinked. "Kristen came in for a bit. Wanted to see the place. I told her you were already asleep, but she begged for one more drink. She was too tipsy to head straight home. Didn't look like her lipstick." Megan laughed, a little too loud. "You study her makeup now?" she said, smirking. "Wow, Cole. I didn't know you had such a good eye for shade names." I shrugged. just didn't look familiar. She turned serious then, walked toward me and placed a hand on my chest. "Babe," she said. "I know it's weird, but it was nothing. Just work people being extra. You know how those nights get loud, long, and full of dumb energy. I didn't want to wake you and Kristen was a mess, so I took care of her. That's it." I wanted to believe her, but I kept seeing that look on her face when she was listening to those voice messages. Not relaxed, not amused, focused, heavy. The kind of expression someone wears when they're bracing themselves. She leaned in and kissed me lightly. "Let's not start the day weird, okay? We should be celebrating." I nodded slowly. "Right?" She pulled away, poured herself coffee, and started scrolling through her phone like the conversation had never happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The scent, the glass, the time, the way she moved when she came in, like she didn't want to be heard. The voice messages, the way her face didn't look guilty, just resigned. It wasn't a fight. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation. It was just an ordinary morning with two people pretending things still made sense. I didn't accuse her. I didn't ask again. But something had shifted. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was strategic. And once you notice a lie, even a little one, you start seeing them everywhere. After that night, something shifted in my brain. Not loudly, not in a thunderclap kind of way, but gradually, like the tightening of a screw. A quiet sense of something being off. Off in a way that no explanation, no well-rehearsed line, could quite straighten. I didn't say anything outright. Not at first. I just started watching. You'd be amazed at what you notice when you stop assuming everything's fine. The first thing was her location sharing. One day it was just gone. We never used it obsessively, but it was there, a quiet safety net. Sometimes I'd check when she was late getting home, just to make sure she wasn't stuck on the green line or something. One afternoon I went to check, and it was disabled. No alert, no warning, just gone. I asked once. She blinked and said, "Oh, that's weird. Probably updated wrong. I'll fix it." But she never did. Then came the late meetings. Not unheard of. Megan had just been promoted, after all. But they became more frequent. 3 nights a week turned to 4. Always something last minute. Quarterly reviews or supplier calls or budget drafts. I wanted to believe her, but it was the way she said it. Casually, without pause, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. I started tracking patterns. Quietly, on my phone at first, then in a spreadsheet hidden in a folder labeled tax stuff. I built columns for dates, excuses, time left, time returned, and locations mentioned. Then I started adding financial data, charges on our joint credit card, bank notifications that pinged my phone. Same bar, different nights. The Little Oak downtown. It showed up too often to be coincidence. Sometimes it was listed around the same time she told me she was grabbing drinks with the girls. But then I'd notice something strange. Only her name on the receipt. And a cover charge for 2. Then the chargers started disappearing. It sounds stupid, but every Friday, I'd find one missing, either from the kitchen drawer or the bedroom wall, like someone had packed it, and on Sunday night it would be back. She stopped leaving her phone face up, always flipped it over now like some kind of reflex. If it buzzed while we were watching TV, she'd stretch, reach and say, "Work again," with a sigh that used to seem tired. Now it just sounded fake. And the coats, that's what really got to me. In early April, she started wearing her trench again. Classic beige, tailored. The one I gave her for our 3rd anniversary. She'd hang it by the door like usual. But one day I noticed a scent on the collar. Not hers. Not mine. Not perfume. It was cologne again. Similar to the one from that night. Faint. But once you smell something that doesn't belong, you can't unsmell it. I stopped sleeping properly. I'd wake up at 3 o'clock, for a.m., reach out for her, and realize the bed was cold. Bathroom light on, or no light at all. Sometimes I'd find her in the living room, scrolling, or in the kitchen, staring at her phone like it was speaking in code. "Can't sleep," she'd say. "Just stressed." But the way she always locked her screen when I walked in told me more than her words did. I remember one Sunday morning, just after sunrise, I found a note in her gym bag. Post-it. It said, "You looked incredible last night. Same time next week?" T. No last name. No company logo. Just a single initial. I didn't confront her. I just folded it back and put it where I found it. By then, the spreadsheet had become something bigger. A system. I added color coding. Blue for plausible excuses. Yellow for inconsistencies. Red for confirmed lies. The red started spreading. There was one entry that kept catching my eye. A charge at a florist near South Station, 3 weeks in a row. Always mid-afternoon. When I asked who the flowers were for, she looked up from her phone and said, "Client birthdays. You know, one of those office traditions." But that shop didn't deliver. Not without a fee. I checked. Then I noticed the return times. Always eerily consistent. 10:46 p.m., 10:48 p.m., 10:50 p.m., as if someone was driving her home, dropping her off right after. Once I asked her what the meetings were really about. She got defensive fast. Said, "Are you seriously interrogating me right now? I work my ass off, Cole. I'm not going to apologize for having a career." It wasn't the words. It was the speed, the precision, like she'd been waiting for that moment, already armed. So I started mapping her routes. Nothing fancy, just matching transaction locations with transit times. One pattern stood out. She always started her girls' night in one part of the city, Seaport or Cambridge, but charges later would ping from the same bar in Back Bay. A single route. Same lift drop-off. Same estimated time. Over and over. Once, I called Kristen to casually ask if she'd enjoyed Friday night. She hesitated. "Oh, right. That was fun," she said, her voice pitched up. "That was the night with the rooftop, right?" But Megan had told me they went bowling. I didn't ask again. The final push, the thing that flipped me from doubt into belief, was the bank message. It was subtle. Just a transfer to someone named Tyler W. The name showed up in our statements 3 times. Small amounts. $40. 35. Once, 60. "Shared lift," she said. "One of the guys on my team. I just covered it because his app was acting up." But something in her voice. I don't know. I looked up his profile on her company website. They weren't even in the same department. That night, I added a new tab to the spreadsheet. One just for him. Tyler. Times, places, mentions. He wasn't just a name. He was a common thread running through the past 6 weeks of Megan's life. Always present in the background. Always just under the surface. I never found a smoking G*N. Not yet. But I didn't need one. I saw the shape of it. The silhouette of a life she was living in parallel to mine. Her timeline ran beside mine, but never intersected. It was like she'd split into 2 people. The Megan I lived with, smiles, casual kisses, coffee on the stove. And the other one. The one who lived between 6 o'clock and 10:46 p.m. The one I didn't know. Next to me, only a shadow. And shadows don't answer questions. They vanish when you turn on the light. I didn't plan to show up at her work party. Honestly, I hadn't planned anything beyond surviving that week without breaking down. But around 6 p.m., sitting alone at our kitchen table, staring at a half-eaten bowl of cold pasta, something in me snapped. Maybe it was the way she'd left that morning. In a tailored navy blazer, silk blouse, perfume a little too heavy for daytime. Or maybe it was her smile, thin, distant, the kind that says, "Don't ask." I texted her mid-afternoon, asking if I could swing by, just to say congratulations in person. No response. No read receipt. At 7:15, I checked her location, not because I expected it to work, but out of muscle memory. Still disabled, just like always. But I remembered something from weeks ago, an old email she'd forwarded about the venue. Hotel Indigo, rooftop bar, downtown. Dress code. Semi-formal, cocktails provided. I kept reading that line over and over. I stood up, put on a blazer I hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding, and left the apartment. No plan. No confrontation script. I just needed to see it for myself. Whatever it was. The city felt louder than usual. I parked 2 blocks from the hotel and walked the rest of the way, feeling out of place, like I was crashing someone else's celebration. The elevator ride to the rooftop felt like it took forever. My hands were sweating. I told myself this was stupid, that I was gonna find nothing, that I'd be the one looking crazy. But I stepped onto the rooftop and froze. There she was, Megan, standing near the bar, laughing. Her head tilted just enough to be flirtatious. She was holding a drink in one hand, the other resting lightly, *mately, on the forearm of a man I recognized immediately. Tyler. He looked nothing like the version I had imagined. Taller, leaner, easy confidence in the way he stood. His shirt sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows, hand gesturing as he spoke. Megan wasn't just listening. She was locked in, her body angled toward him, smile softer than anything she'd given me in months. They looked like a couple. Not the awkward kind sneaking around, but the kind that had already moved past secrecy. Comfortable. Familiar. I didn't move. I don't think I could have even if I wanted to. My heart was somewhere near my throat, pounding so loud I was afraid people could hear it. I stood near one of the heat lamps, half hidden behind a planter, watching her. Then he leaned in and whispered something. She laughed. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't flinch. She didn't look around. She just smiled, and for a second, I swear, she looked happy. Then they moved, together, toward a service door tucked beside the bar. Tyler reached for it, glanced around, then opened it. Megan followed without hesitation. I checked my watch. 8:32. They didn't come back until 8:47. 15 minutes. When she returned, something had changed. Her hair was slightly tousled. Her expression was unreadable. Not flustered, not guilty, but different. Sharpened. Guarded. She scanned the crowd, and then her eyes landed on me. We locked eyes. She froze. Her grip on the wine glass tightened. Then, like she'd been struck by lightning, her whole posture shifted. She smiled too brightly, said something to Tyler, and stepped away from him like he'd just told her an offensive joke in front of a client. I stayed where I was. Let her walk over. Let her come up with whatever version of reality she was about to sell me. "Hey," she said, pretending to be surprised. "You made it." I nodded. "Thought I'd surprise you." She laughed, lightly. "Well, consider me surprised." I could smell the same cologne from the trench coat. Stronger now. Clung to her like static. "You met Tyler?" she asked, like it was nothing. "Heard a lot about him," I said. "Nice to put a face to the name." She sipped her wine, avoiding my gaze. "He's harmless. Just one of those flirty types. All talk. Right?" I didn't push it. I didn't need to. The damage had been done. We didn't stay long. She made some excuse about a headache, and we left early. The silence in the car was unbearable. She played with the hem of her sleeve the entire ride home. When we got inside, she went straight to the bathroom, and I sat down on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, unsure what to do next. I didn't need a confession. I didn't want a scene. I wanted truth, and some part of me still wanted her to deny it, to beg, cry, twist it all into something less ugly. Instead, her phone lit up on the nightstand. I wasn't looking for it, I swear. But when your world is falling apart and the answer glows a few feet away, curiosity isn't curiosity. It's survival. Notification preview, Tyler. Still thinking about you. Last night, God, Meg. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. That message, the rooftop, the scent, the 15 minutes in the corridor, it was no longer speculation. No longer lines on a spreadsheet or weird receipts. It was real, tangible, documented, visual, and it broke something in me. I sat there for 10 full minutes, staring at her phone, listening to the sink run in the bathroom. She was probably splashing her face with cold water, trying to erase whatever happened in that room with Tyler. As if water could rinse away what she'd done. When she came out, her expression was soft, cautious. She opened her mouth to speak, Maybe to ask if I was okay. Maybe to lie again. But I stood up, walked past her and said, "I'm going to bed." That night I didn't sleep. Not even a little. I stared at the ceiling, counting cracks in the paint, listening to the silence press down on the apartment like a weighted blanket I couldn't kick off. The next morning I made coffee like always. She acted normal. Too normal. She kissed me on the cheek, told me she had back-to-back meetings. The usual script. I said nothing, because now there was nothing left to ask. I already knew the answer. The morning after the rooftop felt like standing on the edge of a frozen lake. Everything looked normal. Sunlight pouring in through the blinds, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. But underneath, the ice had cracked. You couldn't see the fissures unless you knew where to look. I knew. Megan moved around the apartment with practiced ease, making her smoothie, humming under her breath. It was almost funny, the performance of normalcy. But I couldn't unsee her hand on Tyler's arm, the way she followed him through that door, or the message glowing on her phone. The truth had settled into my chest like a stone. Heavy, cold, final. I didn't confront her. There was nothing to say. The evidence was complete. Words wouldn't fix it. They'd only make it messier. So I sat at the table, sipping my coffee, and began thinking about the cabin. It belonged to my late uncle. A quiet place near a lake in upstate New York, surrounded by pines that swayed like sentinels. I hadn't been there in years, but I still kept the keys in a small tin box inside my desk. It was the kind of place you could vanish into. No cell service, no neighbors, no one to explain yourself to. Just water and trees and silence. I thought about what a confrontation would look like. Me shouting, her crying, words thrown like stones. It would be ugly. And in the end, it wouldn't change anything. She'd still have Tyler. She'd still have whatever life she'd built outside these walls. No, if she had chosen secrecy, I would answer with absence. That afternoon, while Megan was at work, I packed. Not everything, just the essentials. A single backpack. Jeans, shirts, a sweater, toothbrush, charger. The old photo of my dad holding me on his shoulders. I left my wedding ring on the dresser. Felt heavier than it should have. I moved slowly, methodically, pulled the tin box from the desk. The cabin keys were still there, cool against my palm. I slipped them into my pocket. In the kitchen, I paused. The sun was slanting in at an angle that made the countertop glow. For a second, I could almost see our past lives there. Morning pancakes, spilled coffee, the little notes she used to leave me under the sugar jar. It all felt like a ghost town built inside a living space. I took out a notepad, wrote a single sentence. "I'm leaving. 2:43 a.m. Cole." I didn't add anything else. No accusations. No questions. Just time and departure. I folded the note and set it in the center of the kitchen table. The pen rolled off and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed longer than it should have. When I walked out, the air felt lighter. The city noise dulled behind me. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it gently, like you'd close a book you'd finished reading. The drive north was long and quiet. Early autumn had just started to set in, the trees hinting at red and gold. Each mile felt like peeling off another layer of skin I'd been forced to wear. My phone buzzed twice on the passenger seat. Megan, probably, but I didn't look. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was setting. The lake reflected the sky in muted streaks of orange and gray. I parked, got out, and inhaled the cold air. It smelled like pine needles and rain. The cabin was just as I remembered, with siding, a sagging porch, a single light above the door that flickered before coming on. Dust coated the windowsills. Inside, the air was stale but familiar, like a memory you hadn't visited in years. I didn't unpack right away. I just sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring out at the lake through the small square window. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From release. No text from Megan came that night. No call. No knock on the door. The next day, still nothing. The day after that, silence. I thought I'd feel regret, or panic, or even a weird kind of thrill. Instead, I felt like a man who had been holding his breath for months and was finally exhaling. A week passed. Leaves began to fall into the lake. I started making small repairs to the cabin, fixing the loose steps, cleaning the stovetop, sweeping away cobwebs. My body needed the motion, the labor. My mind needed the emptiness. I didn't check my phone often. When I did, there were a few messages from Megan. Short at first, "Call me," then longer, "Cole, please, we need to talk." Then silence again. Nearly a month passed. The world kept moving without me. My friends texted, wondering where I'd gone. I gave vague replies, taking time off, staying at the cabin. No one pressed. By winter, the lake froze. Snow piled against the cabin walls. I started chopping wood for heat, wearing the same sweater day after day until it smelled like smoke. At night, I'd sit by the fire and stare into the flames, wondering how long it would take before Megan stopped trying to reach me altogether. I didn't count the days. But one evening, I realized it had been almost a year. A whole year without her voice, her touch, her lies. A whole year of steady, echoing silence. The marriage hadn't ended with a bang. No court papers, no screaming match, no dramatic goodbye. It had dissolved like sugar in water. Invisible but complete. And in that absence, I found something unexpected. Not happiness. Not yet. But clarity. When people imagine betrayal, they picture fire, yelling, breaking, slamming doors. But sometimes it ends like this, with a single bag, a single note, and a road that takes you so far from your old life you can't even see its outline anymore. I stayed at the cabin because I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in months, I wasn't scared of not knowing. I had walked away without a scene, without threats, without giving her a chance to twist the story. And somehow that felt like the most honest thing I'd done in years. It was late October when she showed up. The air had that brittle edge to it, the kind that carries smoke from chimneys and tells you winter's no longer just a suggestion. Leaves crunched underfoot like glass, and the lake had started to skin over with ice every morning. I hadn't seen another human face in weeks, and I preferred it that way. But then I heard tires on gravel. I'd been sitting on the porch, drinking black coffee and watching a pair of crows argue over something invisible. The sound didn't register at first. It had been so long since anyone had come down the road that it felt like part of a dream. But it didn't fade. Then I saw the headlights. Slow. Hesitant. A compact rental car, dirty with highway dust, turning up my driveway like it had no idea where it was going. She stepped out before the engine cut off. Megan. She looked thinner than I remembered. Pale. Hair tied back in a loose braid, strands clinging to her face. She wore an oversized coat that clearly didn't belong to her. The sleeves swallowed her hands, and the shoulders drooped like the whole thing was trying to fall off her body. She held a paper cup of coffee, barely half full, trembling slightly in the wind. And she wasn't alone. A little girl climbed out of the back seat. 4 years old, maybe 5. Big coat. Too big. The same dull beige as Megan's. A pink knit hat over tangled hair. She moved slowly, deliberately, holding Megan's hand for balance. But the second she saw me, she froze. Megan walked forward. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a photo. A small, instant kind, the edges bent and soft like it had been handled too many times. She handed it to me without a word. I looked down. In the photo, Megan was sitting on a bench. Next to her was Tyler. He was holding a child. The same little girl wearing the same hat. Everyone in the picture was smiling except the girl. She stared blankly at the camera, her arms limp at her sides. My stomach turned. I looked up, but Megan wasn't meeting my eyes. "It's not his," she said quietly. I didn't say anything. She took a shaky breath. "It's not Tyler's. I know what it looks like. I know how it looks. But it's not him." My voice barely came out. "Then whose?" "Yours." The world didn't spin. It didn't collapse. It just stopped. I looked back at the girl. She was staring at the porch floor, tracing something invisible with the toe of her boot. I felt like I was seeing a painting, flat, still unchangeable. "There were clinics," Megan said. "And reasons." medical reasons, timing, fear. Everything was moving so fast, and I didn't tell you because I was already losing you. I was silent. There was nothing in me that could respond. My thoughts were scattered shards. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, she said. But she needed somewhere safe, somewhere far away. He's not stable anymore. He's Tyler, I asked. She nodded, jaw tight. He wouldn't let go. Not after things ended. He followed me. He showed up at my office. Once at my apartment. I had to move. I had to disappear. And now you're here? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She nodded again. I didn't know where else to go, she whispered. The girl still hadn't spoken. She hadn't moved. What's her name? I asked, barely breathing. Megan hesitated. Evelyn. I looked back down at the photo. Tyler's hands wrapped gently around the child. Megan leaning in close. It looked like a family. But none of them seemed to belong to each other. What do you want from me? I finally asked. She blinked hard, like she hadn't prepared for that question. Nothing, she said. Not right now. I just needed to know she'd be safe. For a night. I didn't know where else to go. I looked at Evelyn again. She was drawing circles on the porch with her boot. Tiny spirals. Still silent. Still distant. I stepped aside. Megan exhaled like she'd been underwater. She guided Evelyn inside and sat her on the old couch. I poured hot water into a mug and handed it to her. Not out of forgiveness, but because it was freezing and she looked like she might fall over. She tried to speak again. But whatever explanation she'd prepared began unraveling the second she looked at me. The words fell apart in her mouth. I didn't press. That night, Megan slept on the couch. I offered the guest room to Evelyn. A small space with a window that looked out onto the frozen lake. She didn't speak when I tucked her in. She just stared at the ceiling and clutched the edges of the blanket. At 2:43 a.m. I woke up and sat up in bed. The same time. Again. I got up and checked the hallway. Silent. I walked past the living room. Megan was curled up in her coat, one arm dangling off the side of the couch, her phone clutched in her palm. The screen was black. I stepped into the guest room. Evelyn was still awake, sitting upright now, drawing on the fogged-up window with her fingertip. Circles again. Loops. Then a tall figure. And next to it, a smaller one. Stick figures. She paused and added long arms to the taller one. Too long. She turned and looked at me. Her eyes were wide, but not scared. Just empty. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, watching, wondering. In the corner of the room, the old mirror, the one my aunt used to insist never be moved, was facing slightly to the side. Not where I'd left it. Something inside me shifted. When I went back to bed, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry or afraid, but because I could feel something had entered the cabin. Not a person, not even an emotion, just a change. Presence. In the morning, Megan made coffee but didn't touch hers. She sat across from me at the table, Evelyn wrapped in a blanket beside her. I'm sorry, she said, for all of it. I don't expect you to believe me, but I thought you should know. I nodded once. There was nothing else to say. Evelyn rarely spoke. She drew the same tall, faceless figure over and over, always beside a crooked house. The clocks in the cabin stopped at 2:43 a.m. Every night, lamps flickered without reason. In the snow, I found 3 sets of footprints. One small, one barefoot, and one impossibly deep with a broken stride. The mirror in the guest room tilted on its own. In her drawing, she labeled the tall figure, the guest. I faced the mirror. My reflection moved out of sync, as if pulling something unseen. I didn't flinch. I repositioned the frame and stared it down. A crack formed across the glass, like ice splitting. The pressure lifted. That night, Evelyn slept soundly for the first time. When Megan returned from the woods, she looked hollow but alive. We watched the sunrise in silence. I buried the mirror deep in a ravine. The dog still growls at glass. But at 2:43, there's only stillness now.